What is a lighthouse? It is a tower with a bright light at the top, located at an important or dangerous place. The main purpose of a lighthouse is to serve as a navigational aid and to warn of dangerous areas. Welcome to the EMS Lighthouse Project podcast. Illuminating the darkness of current EMS clinical practice with the bright light of science. Here are your hosts, Dr. Jeff Jarvis and Mike Verkest.
Howdy, y'all. This is Dr. Jeff Jarvis, and I am so excited because I am sitting in Bend, Oregon. I am out here with Bend Fire Rescue and Petar and Amber Hossick. They invited me out to talk some airway management with their medics, and I am thrilled to be here. One of the reasons I'm so thrilled to be here is my wife, Christy, and I are celebrating our 31st anniversary tomorrow. Now, the timing works really well because it turns out the first time I've ever been to Bend was on our 25th anniversary, so about 6 years ago. And we came to Bend and loved it. So when Petar and Amber invited me back, I said, this is classic. This is a great time to be here. Now, from other Flight Bridge podcasts, so specifically Second Shift, you may have heard Mike and Resuscitation talking about recording in the before times, of course, from McMenamins outside of Portland. Well, guess what, guys? I am at a McMenamins hotel here in Bend. This is the old St. Francis School, and McMenamins is a chain of really, really cool hotels. You can kind of get an idea that maybe bright lights are not the big focus at the McMenamins hotels, but ambiance is, and they really have some phenomenal ambience. We got some really cool artwork. The entire place is full of original artwork done for these hotels. So this is it's a hotel made out of an old Catholic school. They've converted it into a hotel and a restaurant and bars. Oh, do they have bars? So they're making their own beers, and it is Bend, so of course the beers are great. They have their own wine, they have their own whiskey. It's a wonderful place to be. So what we're going to do is talk about some cardiac arrest. I want to go over a couple of papers. Now, the first paper it helps us address a question of whether we should work our cardiac arrest on scene or whether we should transport to the hospital. So let's go over this real quick. The title of this paper is The Association of Intra-arrest Transport versus Continued On-Scene Resuscitation with Survival to Hospital Discharge Among Patients with Out-of-Hospital Cardiac Arrest. This was published in JAMA of 2020 or in 2020, and Dr. Grunau was the primary author. Really, the question this tries to ask is, should we stay or should we go? Well, this was a secondary analysis of the rock epistry. So the epistry is essentially a registry of all patients entered into the rock during various cardiac arrest trials. So the data was collected between 2015 and 2011 and 2015 in a very structured format. The analysis that they did on this was a time-dependent propensity-matched study. What they were looking at is a population of adult consecutive non-traumatic cardiac arrest at 10 North American rock sites. And they were looking at intra-arrest transport as defined by going in or out before return of spontaneous circulation, and they were comparing that to on-scene resuscitation, which meant you either did not transport or you didn't transport until you got ROSC. Now, the important thing that they did here was a time-dependent propensity match study. Because these trials were not randomized to on-scene versus intra-arrest transport, it was a little bit challenging. You can't just compare the two groups because maybe there was a reason they went quickly, maybe there was a reason they stayed and played. So they did some fairly complex statistical analysis here to try to compensate for that potential bias, and I think they did it about as well as they can. Let's just get right to the things that are most important. The outcomes they were looking at was survival to hospital discharge, and then as a secondary outcome, they looked at favorable neurologic outcome. So what did they find? Ultimately, there were 9,406 patients who had intra-arrest transport, and they looked at that in comparison with 18,000 patients who had on-scene resuscitation. Now, the reason those numbers are not balanced is this is not a randomized controlled trial. They were doing propensity matching in a time-dependent fashion. And basically what that means is they looked at a patient who had on-scene resuscitation and they matched it to a similar patient with similar age, witnessed arrest status, bystander CPR, initial rhythm, and they did that time matching. So this was not a function of the on-scene resuscitations just were resuscitated more quickly. And that's important to know. So what did they find out? Their primary outcome, survival to hospital discharge, 4% in the intra-arrest transport group, the load and go, versus 8.5% in the on-scene resuscitation. That is an absolute difference of about 4.5%, and that is statistically significant. If you convert that into an adjusted odds ratio, meaning adjusting for things like age and witness status, all the things that we know have an impact on resuscitation and survival, the odds ratio, adjusted odds ratio for survival with intra-arrest transport is 0.48. Again, statistically significant, that means a 52% decrease in the odds of survival with load and go. Now, if you're thinking 4%, even 8.5% seems like a low survival, remember we're talking about all comers, not just those with a witnessed arrest or not just those with a shockable rhythm. Okay, well that's nice, that's survival to discharge, but what about neurologically intact survival? Again, more than a double increase in survival, 2.9% with load and go versus 7.1% with stay and play. The adjusted odds ratio there, 0.6. So a 40% decrease in survival if you threw them in the ambulance and drove rapidly. So I think that is important. Now, one of the other things this trial looked at, without doing the propensity matching or the time dependent, they just looked at survival at each one of the 10 sites and plotted that against the proportion of patients that they just threw into the back of the truck and went with versus on-scene resuscitation. So there were 10 sites. So for example, site 1, if you will, no idea what site that was, they had about 4, maybe 5% of their resuscitations would they transport before ROSC. So they stayed, they played more than 95% of the time. They had almost 20% survival. That's really impressive. Now, you look at the other extreme, and site J in this paper, again, no idea which site that was, they transported almost 60% of their arrests before they got ROSC, and their overall survival was less than 5%. Now, they plotted all 10 of the sites, and there is almost a linear comparison, or a linear association between working on scene and getting higher survival. So I think that has some really important implications in how we should work our arrest. I don't think this is earth-shattering news. I think it's something most of us have known, but it is nice to actually see the good science that says what we thought was true probably is true. All right, speaking of cardiac arrest, let's go back and take another look at airway management and cardiac arrest. You know, I'm a bit obsessed with this. And I'm a bit confused about the results of Dr. Wang's PART trial. That was the Pragmatic Airway Resuscitation trial. And if you will remember, that was a large rock trial where they looked at cardiac arrest, adult non-traumatic, and they randomized them to either an initial attempt with endotracheal intubation or an initial attempt with a King LT, and ultimately they found 2.9% increased survival in the King LT group. Now, that made a lot of us sit up and go, what is going on with that? I don't understand why survival was higher with the King LT group. So, what do we know? The big question here is why? Well, that's really kind of where secondary analyses of big trials like that come in. There are two papers that looked at secondary analysis of the PART data that tried to answer why. Why 2.9% improved survival? What was the problem? Now, I was privileged to be on both of these papers, so a little biased. I think they're great papers. Let's go over and take a look. My big concern with PART has to do with the low first pass success with endotracheal intubation. And as a reminder, in that parent trial, first pass success with the King LT was 90%. It was 52% with endotracheal intubation. Huge difference. So the big question is, how much of a role did first pass success have in that 2.9% improved survival with King LT? So the analysis we looked at set out to look at exactly that, and specifically we did some regression analysis to look at the interaction between first pass success with either device and outcome. So was it the first pass success? Is that what made the difference? Probably not. As much as it pains me to say it, at least the way we looked at this, we did see an association between first pass success and ROSC, 23% higher odds of ROSC with first pass success regardless of the device, but that didn't hold up to 72-hour survival, survival to discharge, or neurologically intact survival. Now, again, we looked at that as an interaction between first pass with whatever device you used and outcome. Maybe if we looked at this in a different way, we might have found something different, but I think this is probably a pretty sound approach. And as much as it pains me to say it, it doesn't appear that first pass was the primary driver. And that really hurts me. All right, so let's come up with another potential explanation. What else could it be? Maybe intubation resulted in longer chest compression interruptions than did King LT. And one of the big arguments for using some type of supraglottic device, and we'll skip over whether a King LT is truly a supraglottic, but a non-endotracheal blind insertion device, one of the arguments is that you can do it without interrupting compressions. Now, I know a lot of you are throwing things at your radio right now, at your iPod or your iPhone, because you're saying, wait a second, I intubate cardiac arrest all the time without interrupting compressions, and I think we all know that you can do it. The question is, did we do it? Did it happen in this trial? So this next paper, secondary analysis, this was one that Dr. Wang was the primary author on. It was just published in Resuscitation 2021. The title of this paper is Airway Strategy and Chest Compression Quality in the Pragmatic Airway Resuscitation Trial. Again, Resuscitation 2021. This was a paper of the 3,000 patients that were randomized in PART. A little under 2,000 actually had CPR process files. And some of our colleagues in Spain used some really cool technology, automated signal processing technology, that looked at these data files and said, was there a difference between the LT and the intubation group when it comes to CPR fraction, CPR compression rate, or interruptions? Ultimately, the bottom line, there was no difference in the rate, 114 on average in both groups. There was no difference, no statistical difference in the fraction of compressions. And remember, CPR fraction is the proportion of time that you should be doing CPR that you actually are doing CPR. It was reasonably high in both groups, 88% in the LT group and 87% in the intubation group. So that was really close to significant, but not quite there. It was 0.05. That's the result you always hate to get. So let's just say no difference in fraction, and that fraction is measured across the entire duration of the arrest, not just the portion of the arrest dedicated to airway management. What about rate? I think I already said no difference, 114 in both. Let's talk interruption, shall we? Well, yes, I think we shall. So the total duration of interruptions was longer with intubation than it was with the LT. It was 160 seconds total compression interruption with the intubation. 160 with LT versus 181 with intubation. 21 seconds longer, that's a P of 0.02. How about if you look at just the time it took to get on scene to completion of your airway? So we're going to exclude the time that happened after we secured the airway. Well, it turns out there was more interruptions with intubation there also. It was 56 seconds with LT versus 78 with endotracheal intubation. That is a P of less than 0.01. So yes, it looks like this is not a definitive answer of why we saw that improved survival with King LT, but it certainly does look like a pretty good one. Maybe the bottom line here is that it's less about the device and more about how you use it, more about whether you're interrupting compressions during your attempt. And as much as it pains me to say, maybe even more about those compression interruptions than first pass success. All right, so just to summarize what we've covered here, we have seen a 40% decrease in neurologically intact survival if you load them in the back of the ambulance and drive rapidly. We also saw that first pass success is associated with higher ROSC in the PART trial, but not 72-hour survival or neurologically intact survival. And we saw that intubation was definitely associated with more compression interruptions than was the King LT. That seems to, right now anyway, be our leading contender for why we saw the difference. There are still a few additional things that might be going on. Perhaps it's what we do after the airway is secured. Are we, and I don't know the answer to this yet, but are we hyperventilating more with an endotracheal tube than we are with an LT? I don't know. That study is yet to come. Guys, I hope this has been helpful. Since I am sitting here in beautiful Bend, Oregon, I want to bring on Peter and Amber, and we're going to talk about how the Bend Fire Rescue Department runs their cardiac arrest. We'll be right back. Hey guys, welcome back. So just like I said, we have some special guests here in beautiful Bend, Oregon, Peter and Amber Hossick. First off, thank y'all very much for inviting me to Bend. This is absolutely amazing. I am so jealous, and I guess my condolences for having to live in such a shitty place like this.
Somebody's got to fall on their sword, Jeff.
Yeah.
I guess so. I'm glad you took one for the team.
It's all about the greater good.
Well, so y'all had me up here to talk airway management with Bend Fire Rescue, and that was just like pulling teeth because, you know, Bend, I hate talking about airway, so but I did it just for y'all.
Thank you.
Christy is over here. She is actually making sure that I don't fall out of the camera. Tomorrow is our 31st anniversary.
Congrats.
It's a great place to do it. So speaking of beer, this is Lighthouse Project, so we have to cover the important stuff.
Yeah.
What are you drinking?
Light Pilsner. I think the same thing you've got.
I think it is. It actually has a name. So we're at McMenamins, and they make their own beer. And you notice I'm looking over at Christy behind the camera, and Christy's looking at me like, don't make me tell you what kind of beer I got. It's a light Pilsner because it's like, 8:30 in the morning. And
yeah.
We're trying not to be too much of a lush. Amber, what are you drinking?
Black coffee.
Black coffee. What
I'm
is
the
that?
DD.
So there you go. So what is this? We don't have this stuff in Texas.
Dutch Bros. So it is kind of like a version of Starbucks. They hire young, cute, energetic teenagers to run it.
Awesome.
They take pride in, if you're a regular, memorizing your drinks. So as soon as they see your car, your drink's ready to go. And
Nice.
yeah.
So it is not. It is a coffee-specific place. It's not like a stop
they're
and
just
run.
little huts, and then
Cool.
they are dog fanatics. So the dog gets very excited to go with us because she gets a special treat every time she shows up.
Awesome. Tell me what kind of dog you have?
A black lab.
A black lab. Black labs are the best.
Yeah,
Those are
she gives
awesome.
them the eyes,
Yeah.
and the girls can't resist.
can't
and
resist
then
her.
my dog puts on 10 pounds.
You know, I can't. I don't know that I can resist lab eyes either. Well, let's talk a little bit about cardiac arrest. So, just as a, we talked about the JAMA paper from last year that compared survival in the rock epistry from the intra-arrest transport. So we transported before we got ROS compared to those who didn't. Lots of statistical stuff, statistics that actually did a pretty good job of doing it. And basically we found out you're better off working on scene. I don't think that's really shocking. And the other paper we talked about, there were 2 additional papers that were secondary analyses of the PART trial. And we know that as we were talking to your newbies today, we were talking about how there is a 2.9% increased 72-hour survival with the King LT over intubation. And one of your new medics said, well, why? I said, well, isn't that the great question? So
Love the new guys.
I love the new guys. We thought maybe it was first pass. Yeah, probably not, but it was compression interruption. That seems like a bigger deal.
That thing seems to rear its head a lot.
It does. It does. So let me ask you a little bit about, first off, why don't y'all tell me what you do in Bend, and then we're going to jump into some cardiac arrest and talk about how you train and how y'all manage your arrest.
So I'll start. I'm Peter Hossick. I'm the EMS training captain here for the city of Bend. I've been in my current position for about 5 years and love it. This is the job I've wanted for a while, and I consider myself very blessed to train the paramedics of Bend Fire and all of our EMTs, and they've done a super good job, and I'm very proud of them.
And I'm Amber Hossick, and I do EMS consulting for the state, all the way to Bend Fire, to Lapine Fire, just whoever needs me.
Now, I know the answer to this because you were telling me this, but what does consulting mean?
So training for starters. So we kind of analyze what is needed or what's missed, and then build programs based off of what their capabilities are or what things they're seeing. And so we build it specific to that department or that agency, and then kind of bringing them your stuff, going around, looking at what the new research is, and introducing it to people who don't have that same opportunity.
Cool. Well, points for the blatant suck up. I appreciate it. Sucking up definitely works for me. Let's talk cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
So I think the things that we just talked about in the research, I think we had a pretty good idea that that was the case. How do you translate that knowledge into practice?
Yeah. So looking at the time in the study that you talked about, Jeff, it looks like they did 11 to 15, I think was the data set that they used?
2000. Yes, yeah.
So we, Ben Fire, myself, my wife, and one of our medical director at the time went up and trained with Seattle Fire, and I saw a couple big guns on here, Tom Ray and Peter Kudenchuk, and those guys were some of my instructors up there in Seattle, and they were training us in high performance CPR. And until that time, we didn't even really know what that is. And here we are in 2021 now, and that's a lot more familiar term to us, but in 2012, it was not that familiar.
Yeah.
And I would say in my department at the moment, we, like maybe a lot of departments that are still out there, we just didn't think cardiac arrest survived. Go out there, go through the motions, we'll pump on their chest a little bit, we'll drop a tube in their throat, we'll do all these things and, run it 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes and,
Call it quits.
Call it quits because they died.
Yep.
Right? And that belief is self-fulfilling. If you believe that's what's going to happen, then that is what's going to happen. And in that initial training up there with Seattle, we kind of got our eyes open, particularly to what Seattle was doing at the time, was doing this high performance CPR thing. And we quickly saw, oh, there's a number that goes with that. And oh wow, particularly these VF witness arrests, those people go home. Okay. Yeah, we need to try harder. on this. And let me be totally clear, even coming back to the department, and at the time I was just a firefighter, Doc and I kind of came back and said, dude, you guys have got to listen to this. This is amazing. These guys up in Seattle, they're doing this cardiac arrest stuff, they're saving a bunch of lives, and I kind of got the collective eye roll.
Of course. Right.
And they're like, wait a minute, you're gonna just train us in this new CPR, we're gonna save all these people all of a sudden, something that, we've been doing CPR for the last 20 years.
Right.
Like, kind of that non-belief. And then the second piece, the 2 bites of the elephant we took right off the get-go, Jeff, was go to dispatch.
Okay.
And luckily I was so blessed to have my counterpart, Megan Craig, there help me out. And I came in as a firefighter and said, hey, how'd you like to do all this stuff for me? I know you got a full-time job, but, and I have no control over you. You're your own taxing entity. At best we could put a request in. Would you help me, look at some of these calls? And then I'm pretty sure we need to be faster. And luckily, she was nice enough to indulge my wants, and we started doing that. And we, one of the first things we did in the first couple months was, hey, let's sit down and listen to some of these dispatch calls. And we quickly found that, like my fire department, dispatch had the same belief. Oh yeah, we dispatch people do these things. Yeah, those guys don't tend to go home.
Black hole.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next
Sure.
call. And so the other thing we found was dispatch was like asking, hey, Jeff, I know that person's dead in front of you. Would you like to do CPR for me?
If you don't mind,
Yeah. And
unless
if
you have something else to do.
Right. If you got somewhere else to be,
It's okay.
Okay.
it's
Right.
okay. So those were the 2 big problems we tackled
Okay.
right from the get-go. And we also did the thing that Seattle, had said, hey, our survival is, 60%-ish, I think, at the time. And so when I came back, I'm like, hey, EMS chief, what's our survival number? And he's like, kind of like the airway question that you asked your guys.
Right.
We're good at this.
good.
We do a good job.
Of course, we're great.
And I'm like, yeah, chief, they had a number that was associated with good.
Right.
Do we have a number? And he's like, no, I don't think we've ever calculated that. And using some of the rock data, I kind of knew what 2012, 2013's number was. So I was granted a little 40-hour time from off the line, and I went back and did our 2012 numbers. And it turned out that Benfire was not good. The national survival rate at the time for witness was 33, and we came back at 20.
Now this is that scene. So witnessed shockable. Okay.
So hardly one of those stellar, we're kicking butt departments across the
Yep.
country. I'm like, wow, okay, here's our starting point.
Yeah.
This is where we are at right now. And kind of brought that back to my chief, and he's like, great, okay, we need to go get this. We need to change that. Same with my medical director. Hey, this is something that we have to work on. This is what we've told the public we're gonna do. We're here to protect you, and this is like that life safety
Yeah.
thing, number 1 on the list of the credo.
Yep.
And we need to do a better job. So moving to 2013, hey, department, time to learn high performance CPR. And then brought it into ACLS. Okay, let's put all those parts together, but don't get too lost on tubing people,
Right.
giving drugs. That's not what's going to save them. Interrupting
That's
CPR.
the sexy stuff.
Yeah, that's the cool paramedic stuff they taught me.
Right.
Hey, put that plastic in. That will save them.
Yep.
And so got that done, and then Megan and I got together with dispatch and started getting those guys to cut their times down. We went down from like a 3-ish minute, identify, send out, down to, I think in that first year we were down in the little over 2 zone. So attaboy to the dispatchers.
So, there are a couple of things that I'm glad we're having this conversation because there are a couple of components to improvement. So there's the basic science, there's the clinical science, the things that we've just been talking about, and then there is the improvement science. And the improvement science, I think, is the hardest of all of these things. That is, how do you translate this knowledge from the bench to the bedside to the street? And that's a real challenge. And so there are a couple of things you mentioned. You kept mentioning numbers. So you're measuring it and you're setting a baseline. And then you move to improve it. So some of the big components, we were talking about this today, is I kind of think we have an ethical obligation when we learn something to share it. And thank God for the folks in Seattle and their Resuscitation Academy.
Yeah.
They've done a great job packaging that, saying, here's what works, here are the components. You go do it.
Right.
still easier said than done. So
Way.
let's go back and break that down. Dispatch, you were talking about, were y'all doing pre-arrival instructions before this?
Yeah, so we use priority dispatch.
It's a Clausen stuff? Okay.
Yep, Clausen stuff, probably common across a lot of agencies. And so we were using the cards, we were doing all those things, but even having that, I guess even having the sheet of music in front of you doesn't guarantee you can play the song.
It also has there seems to be a fair amount of ad-libbing from the music.
Yes.
You know, I see the music here, but I'm getting my inspiration from somewhere else.
I'm going to riff.
I'm going to riff on it. And it turns out that's not so good.
No.
This isn't jazz we're talking about. So you mentioned times. The time is from, so with your dispatchers, do they come, I think I know the answer to this, but do they finish call taking and instructions and then dispatch? Or do they do this simultaneously?
Kind of
what
the
did y'all figure out?
simultaneous thing.
Okay.
But how fast was that happening? One of the things was we weren't really looking in at the measure. We didn't really know until we started looking. And although it was happening, I don't think we were putting a huge priority on that. I mean, yeah, let's get those units out the door. And then my own crews, hey, it's cardiac arrest. Put down whatever you're doing. This is run to the rig and get out the door because the clock has started.
Yeah.
And we need to get there as soon as possible.
Very good. So you decreased the time to dispatch. It sounds like with dispatch, you spent a lot of time getting them to basically tell the caller that they would be doing compressions.
Yeah. Less of, hey, Jeff, will you do it for me?
Right.
Jeff, let me tell you what exactly you're going to do for me.
Exactly. Do it.
Yep.
And then you probably don't have a whole lot of, I think you may have heard that I'm not the big fan of response times, except for this situation. So this is when they matter. And I'm guessing for an improvement campaign like this, you didn't probably change your response times much. I'm assuming that was about, maybe turnout time got shortened, but essentially roughly the same.
The averages for Bend of the time were between about 6:30 and maybe 7:15, and those really didn't move. Small fluctuations, but that actually didn't change all that much. One of the things we did do, which was a heavier lift for us, was I went to the BCs and I said, actually, it turns out cardiac arrest is a bit of a team sport.
So wake up, wakey, go.
Yeah, I would like another engine. Because, load up the CPR conga line.
Yep.
We're not doing more than 2 minutes per person.
Yep.
And we need more personnel.
I like it.
And they were like, okay.
So one of the days that we did training, we were doing it over in the municipal court. And that's part of the police the court is not part of the police department. The building is right adjacent. And you were telling me, we were talking about police officers.
Yeah.
And you were telling me your officers are way into doing CPR. They really get involved and do compressions.
Yeah, so kind of building on the story a little bit there, Doc. What had happened, so when we got all this stuff and we started looking at our data, I'm like, okay, here we go. This is the change here. We're going to be ready. And I went to a few cardiac arrests after doing all this training, and we're doing the same shit. We're doing the same shit.
Yeah.
Stop to intubate. The pauses were too long. I'm like, guys, we just trained on this. And go back and do some more training. And they're still like, we didn't save that person. I go, hold on, we got to look at a year's data.
Yeah.
And, it'll take you a while. And what it was is the first person came back, and that person we brought back to the department, and we let them see a physical manifestation of a number.
Celebrate your success.
Right. There was the cultural change.
Nice.
After number 1, there was number 2, then there was number 3. And all of a sudden, my department moved from, we don't save these people, to, actually, we save these people. That's our job, and we do that.
Yeah.
Dispatch the same thing. Those survivors were the cultural changes we needed.
Outstanding.
And in 2015 or 16, we have to go back and look at my notes. We trained, because we kept looking at our numbers like, dude, Ben PD beat us by 2 minutes. Look at Ben PD beat us by 2 minutes. Oh, the sheriff beat us by 6 minutes out in the outside. I feel like we need their help.
Yeah.
And so went in there, sat down with their chief, with Steve O'Malley at the time, which was my other, the next EMS chief, and we're going in, and they have this big internal grant called Lorenz, and we're like, dude, let's go and see if the cops will buy 5 AEDs for their cars. And just put them on the sergeant cars to start. Go in there and kind of pitch this stuff to them, and the chief's like, boy, that sounds good to me. AED on every car. We'll spend the money.
I like it.
And we're like,
Especially
left out
since
of there, our
money's free.
jaws are still on the floor. We're like, oh my God, that's amazing. And then we're like, okay, we asked for something, we got to give something. So what we did is we said, we're going to come over, train all the officers in high performance CPR. We're going to continue your training. We're going to be your trainers. So let's teach you to do the same thing that the firemen are doing because you're beating us there.
Yeah.
And 2 minutes earlier of good CPR is a little more chance of survival.
Absolutely.
And so getting those guys there faster, and then the cops started seeing the same results. And then they were like, hey, we're part of this team, and we all know right now law enforcement just gets punched in the face on everything.
Yeah.
And I'm here to say thank you very much, law enforcement.
Yeah, no joke.
We really need you, and in my little microcosm, you guys are the best. You have saved lives. There are people walking around because of law enforcement's work before we got there, and dispatches. It's all, this whole cardiac arrest thing, the table gets set before you get there, right? If you don't have good pre-arrival instructions and good CPR going on before you, if you let the 10 minutes or bend 7 minutes go, your chances of going home are much reduced.
Yep.
And we need the system, kind of like you talked about your bundle of care with Airway Doc. This is a systemic bundle of care. We need all the pieces to work together, and that's what the public expects from us.
Yeah.
Basically.
I think that we've been looking for a long time for the magic bullet in cardiac arrest. Well, it's the Lucas device, it's intubation, it's King LT, it's this drug, it's that drug, and it's really not. It's the simple stuff.
Yeah.
It's the system, and it's that bundle of things, and the bundle of things is really BLS stuff.
Yeah.
And boy, is that hard.
And so where I came in is I trained all of dispatch, but we rewrote dispatch CPR to mimic what their instructions would be. So we break into groups, somebody gives the actual dispatch instructions, and then the dispatchers have to practice the full 6 minutes of CPR that they're giving to the caller. So not only are they getting the benefits of the survivor, but they also fully understand it from the side of what they're asking the community to do too. And one of my most rewarding moments ever is we had an 8-year-old go into cardiac arrest, and our dispatch system was down, so the computer wouldn't load for the dispatcher, and the girl was 8, so she's on the cusp of adult.
Right.
And the dispatcher said, I just had you in my voice telling me how important, out of anything that can happen, how important the compressions were. So that's
Awesome.
what we started.
And they just, because their Pro QA's down, they were just winging it.
Yeah, they were
Total
just
winging
winging it.
Sweet.
And Amber's been just instrumental in leading our public outreach programs, whether it's the police or she's brought both Stop the Bleed and CPR into the schools.
That was
We
more of
couldn't do it
a
without
beg
her.
forgiveness than ask permission.
The Stop the Bleed thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Parkland had happened, and I was already doing CPR in the junior highs. I volunteer my time and go in, and we train all 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in our school district, and then any high schoolers that take health. And Parkland had happened.
Yep.
And I contacted one of the health teachers because we just left the school that day, and I said, what if we add Stop the Bleed to one of the days? He's like, done. And so
Nice.
the school district then called after a little while going, what's going on? We're getting parents that are concerned with this.
Yeah.
But it was so popular, the majority outweighed. And so we just kind of slid under. I'm like, this is why I don't always ask permission.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's really dangerous to teach that, just like it's dangerous to teach sex ed. If you teach sex ed, you have more sex. If you teach Stop the Bleed, you're going to have more
bleeding.
shootings, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
And we
A,
actually
then
tell the
B.
kids, we're like, the risk of school shootings, because that's their first
Yeah,
guess.
absolutely.
And they're under, actually, I was surprised, they're under a lot of stress when it comes to
Oh.
that. Our own child, they had a power outage, and he said, Mom, my first thought was, okay, here it goes. And
Yep.
I'd make him take a tourniquet with him to school, but I'm like, really, that was your first thought? He goes, yeah. And I'm like, okay.
Well, it turns out when you drill day in and day out on how to hide, how to lock doors,
Yeah.
what to do when somebody,
Has some
I'm a
mental
child of the
events.
80s. We actually train on what to do when the Ruskies finally start bombing us.
Right?
So it's not a surprise that I was convinced that the Russians were going to bomb us.
Red
Yeah.
Dawn, baby.
Absolutely. Now, I'm pretty sure, the Russians haven't come up through Mexico. We never had that bombing, and hopefully we're never going to have the shooting either. So
Hopefully.
Well, we always tell the kids. I always give the example. Ben Fire went on a gal who was doing dishes, and
Yes,
she
that-
slipped and slit her radial artery.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, so you can go home and tell your parents that doing dishes is very dangerous.
I like it.
It's too risky for him, Mom.
It's hard, yeah. So, I'm thinking of the analogy between civil defense, which that's really what a lot of emergency management started as, was we have to prepare ourselves for nuclear war. Nuclear war, the odds of that were so slim, but it turns out the odds in Texas, the odds of tornadoes and hurricanes,
Little
really
bigger?
high. I would imagine the odds of
Apparently snowstorms and
avalanche
stuff too.
Wildfires.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think that we're small enough risk of that we can go ahead and separate from the rest of the electric grid, and maybe get some benefits from that. Yeah, so stop the bleed. You train for one thing, and then it turns out all these ancillary things. So the odds of a school shooting really pretty low, certainly way lower than what we think. But that is the thing that gets the school board's attention, and
Yep.
they're like, well, if we train for it, maybe, and it happens, maybe we can have some liability protection. But what they don't think about is, yeah, that's probably not going to happen here, but what is likely to happen is somebody's going to slip. There are knives everywhere, not like an intentional stabbing, but an accidental stabbing. Maybe one of these kids is out hunting, and there's an accidental discharge, or they cut themselves cleaning a deer, and now they know what to do with the tourniquet. So there's all this bleed over, pardon the
The pun.
Fun.
the bleed over benefit. So I think there are lots of benefits from that training.
And we ended up having one of our junior high kids use a tourniquet on his brother during a car accident they had coming back home
Yep.
from a game. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of rewarding. And then after the school district was a little like, what's happening? How did this
Yeah.
slip by? They ended up purchasing Stop the Bleed kits for every
Nice.
single classroom. So
So do they, one of the big things now is you got your AEDs all over the place, and now just add in Stop the
Yep.
Bleed. Lately, it's add in face masks. And I don't mean like
Right.
bag mask valves, I mean like the cootie face mask.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of things we can get out of this. Well, guys, thank you all very much. I know that Lighthouse has a tendency to just run a little bit long. I do want to add in one more thing. I understand that you are torturing your new hires. And you
We
make
call that training, Jeff.
the training. Okay, good deal. Now, you're torturing them, and you're actually making them listen to some Lighthouse.
oh yeah.
Yeah, so that has for years now been part of our training to kind of raise the bar a little bit. Also in our hiring thing, our goal is to hire people smarter than me, and that turns out to be really easy, Jeff.
I don't know that that's true.
He made me promise I would not introduce him as the smartest paramedic
Yeah, but
in
you're
the
going to
world.
say it anyway? I like it.
Please,
I like
yeah,
it.
before the paint chips in high school and the head injuries.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've known you for a couple of days now, and I would certainly think you're onto something there. So I do have to say that I noticed we've been talking to your line staff, and I've been very impressed. Very sharp
thank you.
guys,
Very
great
gracious.
questions. And then your new hires come in. And your new hires are great. I really, really enjoy
I
meeting them.
do love the open new guys. Their minds are kind of just there, and you can point them in the right direction.
I'm a little concerned about your concern for their safety, though. Because, I mean, I know they're newbies, but you put them in red shirts. It's literally they walk in. Christy, they walk in, and they're all wearing red shirts. And I'm like, are you just going to sacrifice them to whatever alien happens to come along?
Yes, it's one gigantic Star Trek joke on them.
Exactly.
You're all security officers until you pass
Correct.
probation.
Correct. Yeah. Well, there's our nerd humor, so we had to get it in. Again, guys, thank you for bringing me up to Bend. I think the weather is perfect. I suspect it's pretty close to like this all the time. It's disgusting.
We put it on the billboards that way at least. And Doc, it's so great to have you here. The training has been fantastic.
Lots of good feedback.
We've learned so much, and I was, for my rookies, feeling very blessed that you got a chance to get some time with them, especially since there's a lot of them at Kano School that haven't touched video yet, never seen a glide scope before, and never heard about some of the dangers of hypoxia and hypotension and stuff that go with intubation. So it's been truly fantastic to have you up here in Bend, and you are welcome here at any point.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right, guys, one more episode in the bank. As always, if you ever have any questions, please drop me an email, drop Mike an email. Now, I have to point out here that we are at a McMinimans. Are there any McMinimans outside of Oregon, or is this in Oregon?
Washington, yes.
In Washington.
Oregon,
Okay.
Washington.
And I understand Washington's sort of northern Portland, is that right?
Yeah.
So this is kind of an Oregon thing, and half of this podcast is in Oregon.
Where's Recast?
Mikey,
Retuscitation.
where are you?
Yeah.
Retuscitation. Oh, lame Retuscitation said, I got to work in the ER. Well,
That's-
Mikey at least had an excuse. He's out vaccinating the folks in Portland today, tomorrow.
Awesome.
So there is some benefit to that. We are enjoying the power of our vaccination right now, sitting here.
Team Pfizer.
Pfizer.
Mask. Team Pfizer. Absolutely. Go Pfizer. Guys, thank y'all very much. Drop us an email. Let us know what you think. Jeff.jarvis@flightbridgeed.com or at Dr. Jeff Jarvis. Thanks, guys.
You've been listening to the EMS Lighthouse Project podcast, a proud member of the FlightBridge Ed podcast family and a Fire Dog production. Visit flightbridgeed.com for more information.